Hey everybody, welcome to Outlier on Air, episode 430. This is the podcast where we talk to the outliers of the world. As always, I'm your host, Everett Gonzalez. On today's episode, we have Laura Cathcart Robbins. Laura is a freelance writer, podcaster, and storyteller. I had a chance to meet with Laura at one of our podcast festivals in LA a few months back. She was in our audience. She was taking a ton of notes. But once I got to know her a little bit better, once I got to talk to her for a bit, I realized that she should not have been sitting in our audience. She definitely should have been giving one of our keynotes at that festival. She's that good. Laura is an amazing podcaster. Her show, The Only One in the Room, was inspired by a Huffington Post article that she wrote about being the only black woman at a retreat with over 600 white women. That article resonated with a lot of people. She got some good reviews, she got some bad reviews, but I think all of it kind of inspired her to start The Only One in the Room. Her podcast is one that you definitely need to be listening to. I don't care where you're from, I don't care who you are. We've all felt like the only one in the room at some point in our lives. This is not a political show for the most part. She talks to people that have felt othered. She talks to people that feel like they are the only one in the room sometimes. I love the conversation that I had with Laura. I think you're really going to enjoy it. She is the real deal. I think you're really going to enjoy her and this episode. So without further ado, here we go.
Time, weather, and always pass. Case of the various
Laura, welcome to the show.
Hi, Everett. Thank you so much for having me.
We're excited to have you. We met at our podcast festival in LA a few months ago. You were in the audience, but after reading everything that you've done and listening to some of your shows, you definitely should have been on our stage. So we're going to have to remedy that in future festivals as well.
How wonderful would that be? I would be really honored. Your festival was great. I got so much out of it. Of course, for anyone that was there, it was like maybe the hottest day of the year.
That it was. I keep telling everybody it was the hottest festival in LA for sure.
Right. What? Oh, that's good. That's much better than that. Yeah. But it was like, my boyfriend and I, we just went through and, he's my co-host and producer for the podcast. So we just had our notepads out and, I had my phone out taking notes on my phone, but there was just so much information to glean. And I'm actually meeting somebody today later on for lunch that I connected with there. So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
It's stories like that we love to hear, right? We put these festivals together. We bring in speakers, we have workshops, panels, all that good stuff. But the magic happens when our audience and our speakers and our sponsors kind of meet and lets either business opportunities or just friendships happen kind of outside of our control, right? We try to build a platform, but it's stuff like this that we really love to hear about. So whatever happens in that lunch meeting or moving forward with anybody else, like we've done our job, I feel, when that happens.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think the networking part of these types of events are really the meat and potatoes of, if you go there and you don't network and meet people and meet them afterwards, then you're really missing out. That's, going away with the information from the panelists, obviously that's amazing. And you provided a wealth of information, but that networking piece is so money. Like I said, I think you're missing out if you don't make it a point to walk up to people, exchange information, and then pursue them for a face-to-face afterward.
Love it. I'm glad you did it. So good. We'll continue to do our part and because we love hearing these type of stories. Now, when we met, I through a mutual friend, I knew that about you and your show, but it wasn't until we met at the festival that I really kind of dug in and really checked it out and listened to a few episodes. And from there, I've been reading a lot of your work, which is amazing. And I want to get into all of that. So the show, your articles, what life is like now, but then kind of peel back a little bit of the stuff that's going on and really dig into who you are and your experiences. So to kind of just get it going and to kind of give the audience a little bit of feedback, let's talk about your podcast first. The Only One in the Room. What's that about?
So Um, just a little over a year ago, I wrote an article for the Huffington Post, which they titled, "I was the only Black person at Elizabeth Gilbert and Cheryl Strayed's writing retreat."
Mhm.
And I had a different title, but it doesn't matter. But anyway, I wrote the article because I did go to this retreat. I'm huge fans of both Elizabeth Gilbert and Cheryl Strayed. Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, absolutely changed the way I approach everything, but specifically writing. And Cheryl Strayed's Wild was, it's like one of the Bibles that I refer to when I'm trying to dig deeper for personal essay stuff or the work that I've been doing on a memoir. It's been so helpful. So I was really excited to get to this retreat in the Santa Cruz Mountains and see the two of them. And when I got there, there were 600 people there, including staff and faculty, and I was the only Black person.
Wow.
And as I wrote in the article, I'm really used to being the only Black person. It's not something that I usually even notice or take with me. I usually don't let it impact my experience. But this time, I had never been in an event with 600 people and been the only Black person. So I wrote about it for the Huffington Post, and it went viral. And I woke up after it went live the next morning. I had 568 messages, and that was just crazy to me. Nothing like that had ever happened to me. And they were from people, of all races and creeds and ethnicities who just identified with feeling othered, with feeling alone in a room full of people. And so I happened to also be at that time enrolled in a podcast class through this place called the Writing Pad here in Los Angeles. And it was taught by this woman named Anna Scott, who has a popular podcast here called There Goes the Neighborhood for KCRW. And I needed to come up with a title for the podcast in that class. And so I came up with The Only One in the Room, because that was what kept coming back to me through those messages. I've been the only one in the room before I've been the only one in the room. Mm-hmm. So I decided I was going to title my kind of it's not it was a podcast that we had to do for the class only, like a project podcast. But I titled it The Only One in the Room, and I decided to make it about all those stories representing those 568 messages that I got. So
very exciting.
Yeah. So that was why. That's the genesis of it.
Yeah, and so much to unpack there. So let's kind of take it a step at a time. You kind of mentioned that you're kind of used to being the only one in the room, right? That's a little bit different or whatever. When you were at that retreat, you obviously noticed that you were the only one, and you kind of mentioned that in the past it hasn't really affected you, but 600 people, that's a lot of people. Was it intimidating? Were you upset about it? I mean, let's talk about how you felt in that room.
Yeah, I was not intimidated, for sure. And I don't think I was upset. I was just kind of shocked, honestly. And I kept looking around thinking like maybe somebody else Black would join, because it's a 3-day retreat. Mm-hmm. And you know how people get there maybe the second or the third day. And when no one else was there, like every time I looked around in any particular room I was in and realized that I was the only one, I was just kind of like, wow, in 2018, yeah, I'm the only Black person here. So then after I left, I started kind of thinking like, wow, they really could have taken some steps to make sure it was an inclusive event. Like someone missed the ball here. I wasn't angry. I was just thinking that this could be a teachable moment and this could be done better. It should be done better.
What was the reaction from the people putting it on, the staff, or even other attendees, right? Being Hispanic myself, I've been in the only one in the room many times. And mm-hmm. I get two type of responses. Either I'm kind of ignored, which is fine, or sometimes they're overly like accommodating because they notice that I'm the only one. They don't want me to feel bad about it. They're trying to do some good about it. So either ignored or kind of a ton of attention on me. What was that like for you?
I was definitely stared at a lot. And, I felt the energy shift around me, but no one said anything to me. I also had gone there. I'm in a virtual writers group where we come from all over the country. There are 6 of us, but 4 of us went there. So I was kind of meeting them face to face for the first time. They're all white. And when I got there, I texted them because I was in the check-in line. I'm like, I'm here and I'll be easy to spot. So come and find me.
Nice.
And they were marveling as well. They were just like looking around the whole weekend, marveling like, wow, I can't believe you're the only one. Like, this has got to be an oversight. Or, Elizabeth Gilbert and Cheryl Strayed, their fan base is very white. It's not a big surprise, but it feels like the facilitators could have done more. The facilitators for 444, what was it called? 1440, Multiversity. That's the facility where it was held. They did contact me right after the article came out, and asked if I could give them some feedback on my experience so that they could make it a more inclusive event the following year, this year in 2019. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk about the article. You got a lot of feedback.
Yes.
Talk to us about some of the bullet points, or let's go in depth as to what was said in that article.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I said, honestly, I don't think the article is really a fair representation of my experience there. It was just one facet of my experience where I just talked about being the only Black person there. I really did have a great time at the retreat and I learned a lot. But in the article, I write about, there's one particular piece that I got a lot of feedback on, which was I was paired up with a red-haired woman to read a piece that we had written in like a workshop. And I wrote my piece on Black families at my kids' school who were always asking me to go to church with them. And I don't want to. So and it's not just a religious thing for like in the Black culture. It's more of a cultural thing.
Sure.
It's kind of like synonymous with family and community is being in church. So my rejection of that was like a rejection of the culture and the community to them. And so the piece that I wrote at the retreat was about that. And I read it to this woman who was very sweet and earnest. And as soon as I read the title of it, she burst into tears. And she then just kept talking and talking and talking and saying, I have so much affinity for African Americans. And, I prayed when that little African American boy was shot by the police. And I feel like I connect with African Americans better. And she just went on and on and on. And I just wanted her to stop because I hadn't said anything yet. I hadn't even read the piece. I just read the title at that point. And so what she was connecting to had nothing to do with me. But I wrote about that because in retrospect, it was actually pretty comical to me that she just couldn't stop talking, like trying to kind of make it up to me.
Sure.
That, there was like a guilt factor. Some people call it white guilt, but, and so I wrote about that, and that is the thing that I got the most feedback about. And I was really surprised how much people were hating on her. Of course, I didn't name her. I just wrote about her anonymously, but people really didn't like her and were really appalled by our interaction and how she was with me.
And so you said it was comical, but how did you feel about that interaction?
At the time, I was again shocked and a little like, okay, girl, come on, just stop. Like, I was a little fed up, a little frustrated. a little bit, it felt a little put on for me, like it wasn't completely authentic. And so I felt very disconnected from whatever she was experiencing because of that. And I don't know if she experienced it authentically, or if she was experiencing it as something that was real for her at the time, but it didn't feel like it to me. And I kept looking around to seeing what everybody else was thinking of our encounter, because she was just wailing. We were sitting cross-legged facing each other in the aisle with 600 people around us. And so it seemed comical to me at the time, and afterward it really seemed comical.
And so let's talk about the real world then.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you still get some of that, that white guilt type of discussions and people that you communicate with on a regular basis. There's some that don't care. You're a person that doesn't matter. And then those obviously that don't like you, don't like whatever, right? But what is that like in the real world for you? You're in LA, right? Very diverse.
Very diverse.
You're a professional doing a lot of cool things. But just overall, what is it like for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my awareness of what it's like for Black people in this country is different than my own experience being a Black person.
Mm-hmm.
I have been very fortunate in that I don't have very many. I've never had a scary encounter with the police. I'm not followed around in stores. I don't feel like I get shaded a lot for being Black. There is the other thing, the opposite of that, which is this particular intrigue with me because I am Black. That I find to be offensive as well.
Yeah, I can see that, sure.
Yeah, and I wear my hair natural, so that is something that has been really an interesting journey. I could write several essays about how only white women have, and not white men, have tried to touch my hair, putting their fingers in it all the way down to the scalp and like kind of rubbing it without asking my permission. It almost feels like an attack, and they are marveling at me, but not with me. Sure. Which does not feel good. And yeah.
No, go ahead.
No. I don't know what I was going to say next.
And so this is, and I don't know, right? But I think we have similar experiences, although it's not quite the same, right? I'm a Hispanic male, right? In a professional setting and all that stuff.
Yes.
I'm married to a white woman, a redhead.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that I've had those negative experiences either in stores or with the police or anything like that. And I don't know, and you tell me, because I have friends that are just like me in a professional setting and all that good stuff, and they've had a ton of negative experiences, and is it an attitude? Is it a way that we see the world, or are we just lucky?
Again, going back to my being fortunate, my parents who, I was born, I'm 55, so I was born in the Negro ward at the Illinois Research Hospital.
Wow.
And my parents were in Jim Crow, like that's how they were raised, in Jim Crow, with separate water fountains and separate bathrooms and, separate seating areas on buses and public transportation. They did a magnificent job shielding me from racism. I was very unaware that there was any racism in the world growing up. And I think that the attitude that I have and the confidence with which I was raised does seem to command something from the people that I have encounters with. I don't know that can be the entire explanation for it. I really do think that there's a certain amount of good fortune in it. And, certainly I can be well-spoken. I usually am. I can definitely code switch and speak like my brothers and sisters, like we do when we're together and there's no one else around.
Sure.
But for the most part, I speak like I'm speaking to you now, and I think that helps. But I definitely have a confidence that could be also construed as naivety, because I'm not checking for anybody checking for me in that way.
I love that. That's powerful. That's reality too, right?
Yeah, it is.
Let's get back to the all those messages that you got from people after the article went live.
Yes.
Most of those positive and people telling their stories. Did you get any negative feedback? Anybody pushing back on the article?
Yes, I got a lot of negative feedback. I stopped reading the negative comments about a weekend to after the article was published. About, within that week, I just made a decision to stop reading them. I would say, like, the comments that are on the article, if you go to the article right now, you'll see that they're about 50-50.
Oh, really? 50-50?
Yeah.
I thought it would have been more.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 70-30. But
okay.
But yeah, there were a lot of people who felt like I was complaining for no reason. A couple people said, if I were the only white person at an all-black event, you wouldn't hear a word out of me. People thought that, like, well, what did you expect them to do? Like, recruit black people to come here? That would be racist too. Like, so there was a lot of anger in the responses rather, and people felt like I was being, entitled, which I thought was really interesting because, as a whole, black people aren't entitled to much in this country. And so, I was really careful when I wrote the article not to do anything but express how I observed it and how I experienced it. I didn't actually make a call to action in it. I wanted it just to be like whatever you read, you understood that this was my experience there, and not anything that I was wishing would happen or angry about. This is just what it was like to be the only black person at a 600-person event. So the other comments really understood that, and most of the comments were from white people, and they said that in the comment. I'm a white woman. I'm a white man. Blah blah blah. And most of the positive comments just really were apologetic. Honestly,
yeah.
Like, I'm really sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry that we live in this country where this exists. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So it was interesting to see how the article impacted people, particularly people who don't have the experience of, and because most of the people that responded, have skin privilege and are of the dominant culture. So they don't know what it's like, and they won't. But I was hoping for more response from people of color, but I didn't get as much, honestly.
So did you, do you have any negative feelings with the Brave Magic people, the people that hosted this event, or was it just one of those things?
Yeah, no, I don't have any negative feelings toward them. I think they just, I think they were inconsiderate in that they just didn't consider the optics of the possibility of an all-white audience, all-white participation. And so it just, they were in the Santa Cruz Mountains. They are in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was expensive to get up there. I think they were just thinking, we'll get who we get.
Yeah.
And there'll be Elizabeth Gilbert and Cheryl Strayed's fans, and it'll be great. And now I think that they will be looking at more diversity on the stage, and looking at how to improve the diversity of the audience, and not just racially, but economically or socioeconomically, and ethnicities and nationalities and that type of thing.
I love how that starts because of the article, right? And
Yeah.
I'm assuming the negative stuff that they received, and even maybe some of the positive light that they received, whatever it is, it's going to look different this year, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, they've already had it, so
they already had it.
I'm
what does it look
assuming
like?
that
Do you know?
it did look different. I don't know. I haven't gotten much feedback, but I do know that they had Jada Pinkett Smith.
Oh, nice.
Part of it, so that's a really good start, and she was on the stage, and I'm sure that brought in a more diverse audience. So I'm actually going to try to catch up with them and see what changed this year, but I haven't done that yet.
Good. And Jada, I'm sure, speaks her mind, so it's
Yes.
that was a positive. Now, with what I like about this story and about you, a lot of people get a lot of negative feedback from anything that they do would usually stop, right? Because it can get intense with online and stuff. You did the opposite. You went all in with the podcast, with the way you're continuing to write, and the things that you're kind of out there putting out into the world. What is that scary? Is it scary still? Tell me how you're feeling now.
So the comments that were directly on the article were about 50-50 negative and positive, but the direct messages I got were almost all positive.
Nice.
And so I was inspired by those direct messages to tell those stories. The story of the man in the wheelchair who wants to date, but all people see is his wheelchair. The white guy in Iowa who wears hearing aids and feels like he's alone in any room he goes into because he can't hear this, when the room is crowded. Or the overweight white woman in her 70s who wants to take a yoga class. Like, those are the stories I wanted to tell. When I look, and those are 3, real direct messages that I got thanking me for having written an article that said how they felt, even though they didn't share my skin color or my age or my whatever it is. They didn't share it. They didn't have to have all those commonalities and those factors in common. They just knew what it felt like to be othered. And so I was excited to tell those stories. I wasn't scared at all. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I always figured this is a niche that's obviously not being filled, because for me to get that much of a swell, of direct messages within 48 hours after this article is released, there's something happening here. These people want to hear these stories and they want to share them.
I like that easily you could have, planted that flag and marched forward with just stories of Black women feeling that way. But we're all othered at some point of our lives, right? And so you're going, like you just mentioned, with the wheelchair guy or that the woman, whatever.
Yeah,
it's these stories that I think people are attracted to, again, because we all feel like we've been there, some in some part of our lives with different things. And so, again, nobody would have blamed you for doing that, but you did the opposite, which is, I think, is what really is getting people really involved and excited about the project the project with the podcast and everything else that you're doing.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. I knew it was the next. I didn't know. It felt like it was the next right step to take to create the space for that.
So, what's the goal? Right, you've in a very short period of time, you've received a lot of attention. You're writing the podcast. What are the next 3 years going to look like?
Well, I would. So I'm just going to backtrack just a little bit, because I have been populating the guest list of this podcast with my personal relationships, which is what I was encouraged to do. Start with your friends. I happen to have friends who have access and an audience, in what we used to call a Rolodex back in the day.
Yeah. The young people are like, wait, what? What is that?
Right. Yeah, list of names and phone numbers. So I started, not with the stories that I wanted to tell, the story of the man in the wheelchair, because I needed whoever my guests were to bring some kind of audience or name recognition to it, so that because we're starting, from a deadlift with no audience. So I needed, or I don't know if I needed, but it was suggested to me to go and bring in guests with name recognition or their own audience to tell their stories so that we could get this off the ground. And then eventually I can just tell the stories I want to tell. So I started that way. And again, I've been very fortunate, with a lot of persistence from me. Almost everybody that I've gone after has said yes and come on the show and brought their audience with them. So that's been really helpful. But for the next 3 years, to answer your question, I really like to tell the stories of people that don't have an audience or name recognition, because there's some really fascinating stories, 3 of which I just kind of rattled, but there's so many more. People are pitching me all the time with their stories. And, I'm just trying to we're doing 10 episodes a season. And we're in our 3rd season right now. So I'd like to get a couple more seasons off the ground and then really turn my attention to curating those stories, the stories that started us off, the stories that inspired this in the first place.
I love it. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
It's funny. So with our show, we have 400 plus episodes, right? We talk to entrepreneurs, artists, authors, musicians from all over the world, doing amazing things. And one of the things that we talk about, they are very good at whatever, writing music or writing books. But on top of that, they kind of have to run a business as well. And a lot of times it doesn't go well, right? They could be very talented in this one thing, but the running of the business is not great. So for you, you're obviously a very talented writer and storyteller, but there's a business side to this as well with the podcast production and everything else you're doing. How does that mix in your world?
That is a really good question. So, before kids, which was, my kids are 20 and 21, and I was a stay-at-home mom with them. So I haven't worked outside my home since they were born, but I do write. And so that generates income, but it's not like I haven't had a job. But before then, I was a publicist in my late 20s and early 30s. And I understand that type of networking and the importance of, the connections. And I know how to pitch people. I know how to pitch journalists. I know how to produce as well, because not produce podcasts, but I know how to produce in general. I was married to a director producer for a really long time. Well, 14 years. Mm-hmm. And, I was really his partner during that time and privy to how a production comes into play and how to make it good. And so all those factors I have in my skill set. Like, I understand how to do all of that without anyone telling me. But you're right. I don't know the tech part of this at all, which is why we have an executive producer, Christina Barcy, who is amazing and was part of your festival.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And she sits in on all of our interviews, and she and I collaborate on the list of items that need to be recorded each time we go into a session, and she does all the post for it. So she edits it, she sends me the edit, I make notes, send it back to her. That's the edit that gets posted on the RSS feed or gets what's it called?
Sure.
See, this is how technically unapplied I am. But it gets like that. We know what I mean. So that goes on the RSS feed, and then it goes out, and she does all of that. She does all the posts, all the logistics. She compiles our stats and gets them to us. And So all I do is the creative part and the research. I research all the guests really thoroughly. That's the other
Which
thing
is
I
a
do.
great spot to be in, right? Doing what you do best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my boyfriend, who's also my co-host and the producer, he does the rest of the stuff that isn't in my skill set, which is like the website, doing the video for YouTube. He does a lot of the guest correspondence that doesn't have to do with the creative part of the podcast. Like, here are the pictures, here's your episode link, like that kind of thing. So, and he does the merchandise. He takes care of the store. So he does all of that stuff. Who knew there were so many facets and areas? Oh my goodness, right?
And so now, what are you doing? This can get expensive. What are you doing? Is the show bringing in enough revenue, sponsorship wise, partnership wise, to be able to kind of get you to that level and beyond? What's that look like?
It is absolutely not bringing in enough revenue. So this is what he and I decided, because we're partners in this. We're making this investment for 2 years.
Yeah.
And we have dialed down our expectations of making any revenue back or profits for 2 years. If it doesn't work, if it's not looking like it's working in a year and a half, we'll probably pull back. But hopefully, with that mindset, because what was also suggested to us, and, some of this we learned at your festival, was, we want to have a really quality product. We have an evergreen library, so that's beneficial to us. And we wanted it to be really clean, professional, and quality. And so, in the hopes that investment pays off once we have the audience that we're looking for, once we have the number of downloads that we're looking for, people, and it actually does happen when people find us, and we can see this through the statistics that Barcy creates for us. People go back through the whole library. It's like when someone starts following you on Instagram and they go back and like all those pictures.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can just tell that they're just going through the whole thing. That's, we can see it like that people are going back to the library and listening. So that part of it is working. Getting the podcast to be as discoverable as possible is really our big challenge. So, we started a Facebook group. We're creating a newsletter and compiling an email list. And that's why we're giving ourselves 2 years, because we're going to really try to, throw every ball against the wall and continue to make a quality product, but do everything else that we can, like the side hustles, to get it discoverable. And then if that doesn't work, then we don't make it anymore, or we make it differently.
I love that you guys are all in with this, and you're giving yourself a specific amount of time to either make it happen or not. But you already have a quality show, which I think, in my opinion, is the hardest part, right? The business side of it, the discoverability, even though it's tough, very, very doable. Once you have a show that once people know about it, for me specifically, like, we're in. I love it. We're going to continue to follow it. I'm assuming that's a lot of the people that finally find you are doing. And so, I don't know, you're sitting in a pretty good position right now. The future looks bright with the podcast and everything you're doing because of it. So again, we love what you're doing. We're fans of what you're doing. We're going to continue to push out a lot of your shows and then the things that the articles that you continue to write. So last couple of questions as we kind of wrap this up a little bit. What's the single biggest reason for your success?
The single biggest reason for my success, well, this is going to be kind of a backwards answer, but we didn't really talk about this part of my life, but I'm 11 years sober, or 11 plus years sober now. And prior to getting sober, I was unknowingly inauthentic. I was not willing to present my authentic self to people for fear of being misunderstood or judged, or disliked. And that sounds kind of cryptic, but I would just hide certain parts of myself, like the fact that I didn't graduate from high school. I bailed in the 10th grade. I never went to college, so I don't have a formal education. That's something that no one knew about me before I got sober. The fact that I had, young kids and needed to get sober was a great source of shame to me. So I hid everything about that from people. And that doesn't mean that I hid out. I was very visible. I was parent association president. I sat on the board of my kids' school. I played tennis. I was, at lunches and dinners with my friends. But no one really got to see the whole Laura because I compartmentalized everything and hid it. So fast forward to now, post sobriety, one of the things in the 12-step program that I'm in is it's really important to be honest, aka authentic, in all of my actions and my exchanges with people, so that I don't feel like I have anything to hide, and therefore don't hide anything. Hiding is bad for me. Secrets are bad for me. So I think one of the reasons or maybe the biggest reason that I am having the success that I have now is the thing that I was always scaredest of, the thing I was most afraid of, which was to be myself and be judged and be assessed. But what happened as my authentic self, people are seeing me and embracing it. And I never knew that could happen. And so that inspires me to do more and be more authentic and be more of myself. And I think people dig that. I think it's refreshing. And, I'm not fronting, and I'm not going to tell you anything to make me look good only, or I'm not going to, shade anybody else so that I'll look better. I just don't do that anymore. So the way that I live, I think, translates to something that is really connectable for people. And like I said, I think they dig it.
That's huge, and we definitely can see it in your articles and on your show. And this might be a silly example, but when people are known for something, they're usually all in that something because of their followers, even though they don't always agree with whatever the trend or the topic. Right? If you're known as a Republican conservative, you go all in with all of the topics. Republican, conservative, and on the other side as well with the liberal stuff.
Yes.
And again, this might be a silly kind of example, but reading your blog, you kind of, the Jordan Peele movie, Us.
Yes.
You again, reading that, you were like, hey, let's stop here. It wasn't that great. Why is everybody saying it was so great? And, you kind of listen to your things about it. When other people, I think in your position, because of the following that you're getting, would have been like, oh, right, it's Jordan Peele. He's, we're supposed to like him and follow him with everything that he does. But you kind of took him to task a little bit with the movie. And I think that's huge, right? It's you're not all one thing. You have different ideas about even, culturally, politically, just everything in general. And I think people can see that. It's a silly example, but I think it speaks volumes to who you are and how you're trying to be as authentic as you possibly can.
Well, thank you for that. I don't know that it's a silly example. That was actually one of the things I was most nervous about publishing. And I published some really personal stuff, as if you probably know, but I was afraid of the fallout from that. And I was just like, no, fuck it. Look, I thought it was trash. And this is why, because I was really disappointed because I thought I was going to be scared and I wasn't. And I was like, somebody else has to feel like this. So I published it anyway. And I did take a lot of heat for it. A lot of people took me to task and explained to me why it was a good movie in great detail. My opinion holds.
Yeah. And so, well, let's talk about it. Did people think it was great because it was Jordan Peele and he's kind of the,
Yes.
the new voice?
Yes, I think people are afraid to trash him. I actually put that in there. I think that especially the critics who praised it were just afraid to trash a Black director during Black History Month, and who had made this really incredible movie, Get Out, that had started its own, it was a cultural touchstone. And so I think they jumped on board, and I think it was wrong for them to do so. I think everything should be a meritocracy.
I love how you're calling it out like you see it, right or wrong, you're calling it out. And I think that's what is going to really get people to continue to follow you and like you, right? Even if we don't always agree, I think this is the way to do it.
Yeah. Just really quickly, I know we only have a couple more minutes, but I just interviewed a gentleman. I kind of stalked him to come on the show. It won't come out until next year, but he's a Black Republican who was a lifelong Democrat, became a Republican in 2016 in order to vote for Trump. He's a huge Trump supporter, and he's running for mayor of Pasadena, which is, a city here in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area. And I was just like, I've got to get this guy on the show, not to dress him down or dismantle whatever he's created. I just really wanted to have a conversation with him. Certainly as a Black Republican in Los Angeles, he's got to be the only one in the room many times.
Yeah, for sure.
There just aren't very many Black Republicans in this very liberal, sea of voters. So we had a great conversation. It was one of the most interesting conversations I've had, I think, on the podcast. And I just gave him the space to express how he felt and why he felt it. And I let him answer questions. And we disagreed on a lot, like you just said. We agreed to disagree on quite a few things. But I wanted to give him that space, and I want to tell more stories like that. I'd love to have somebody come on and talk about, someone who is an NRA member talk about the Second Amendment and like that kind of thing, and see where they are with it. I'm a gun owner personally, but I don't believe in civilians having weapons of war. So I kind of stand in the middle of it. And so I like to just have conversations without people, just going to slander and hate speech and going in right away on each other as soon as they find out that they're on the quote unquote other side.
So without sounding too much like a fanboy, I am definitely. I think the conversations that you're having are important, right? We see it especially on social media, even in the news now. We disagree with somebody, they're either racist or whatever, automatic, because we try to shut it down, that conversation, when I think we're supposed to be doing the opposite. Have that conversation, even if they are racist, even if they are gun owners, even if whatever. I think they kind of see the other side, because it's not all bad. Of course, there are bad apples. It's not all bad, though, even if people disagree with you. I don't care what side of the aisle they're on. And you're doing it.
I agree. Yeah. We're that's a new place we're going in this season that we're recording now, which is season 4. And actually season 3 and 4. Season 3 is the season that's out, and then season 4 is the one that's going to start in January. And we like our guest next week is a sex worker who is now a family and immigration law attorney at the border.
Nice.
She's an amazing story. She was a Mormon. She was raised as a Mormon, became a sex worker, and then went to law school kind of on a fluke, and ended up doing this really important work at the border. And I'm sure it's controversial for some people, but I thought hers was a really important story to tell.
Keep up the good work. Keep up those great stories. I think we definitely need them. But this time in America, we definitely need to hear those stories. Again, not all negative, not all pointing in one direction. I think just honest conversations.
Yes,
we need more of that. So now, for those that are listening, that I'm assuming are already fascinated with you and the work that you're doing, where can we find you online?
I'm glad you asked. So on Instagram, I'm at official Cathcart, and that's CATHCART. I'm sorry, I'm at official _ CATHCART Robbins, ROBBINS. That's one word. So at official _ Cathcart Robbins. And then The Only One in the Room has its own Instagram site, and it's just at The Only One in the Room. And then on Facebook, I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins on my public page and private. And then on the there's an Only One in the Room podcast page on Facebook. There's also an Only One in the Room Facebook group that I would love for anybody who's listening to join. And on Twitter, I'm Laura C. Robbins, at Laura C. Robbins.
I love it. So Outliers, you can go to outlierhq.com. That's outlierhq.com. First of all, subscribe to the podcast, rate, review it, share with your friends. But there you're going to find Laura's links to her social media accounts, to her website, to her podcast. Obviously, she's the real deal. She's doing some amazing work. Follow her, interact with her, and subscribe to her podcast. Laura, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show. We wish you nothing but success.
I'm so pleased, and I feel so honored that you had me on after listening to your podcast and the rest of your guests. This is extremely cool for me, and I can't wait to hear it when it comes out.
I love it. Thank you so much. Outliers, talk to you tomorrow.